The champagne tower caught the light of 1,000 crystals, and for one perfect second, the whole ballroom held its breath. 200 guests, a 7-tier cake, a bride in a gown that cost more than most people's cars, and my brother Preston standing at the microphone with the practiced smile of a man who had rehearsed this exact moment his entire life. I sat 3 tables back in a dress I bought on clearance and watched him raise his glass. "I want to thank everyone who made this day possible," he said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "My parents who taught me the value of hard work. My beautiful bride who chose me. My colleagues at Hartman and Associates who believed in me." He paused, letting the applause roll over him like a wave he had summoned himself. "And of course, my little sister Natalie, who couldn't quite make it work in the real world, but at least she tried." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was polite. The kind of chuckle you give when someone makes an awkward joke at a dinner party. My father nodded. My mother offered her tight, approving smile. Vanessa's father toasted the air. And in that moment, I understood something none of them did. In 72 hours, I would sit across from Richard Chen on national television. In 72 hours, the scruffy freelancer they had written off as the family disappointment would be introduced to the world as the youngest self-made female billionaire in clean energy technology. In 72 hours, everything they thought they knew about me would collapse in front of them, and there would be nowhere left to hide. But I am getting ahead of myself. Because to understand how a girl in a clearance dress ended up dismantling her family's entire understanding of success, you have to go back. You have to go back to a house on 3 acres of manicured desert. You have to go back to a dining room where I once said the word engineering and watched my father set down his fork like I had cursed at the table. You have to go back to the night I sketched a company on the back of a napkin at 2 in the morning in a coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso. You have to go back to a rooftop in Denver where a stranger in a faded t-shirt told me I was one careless move away from electrocuting myself. Stay with me, because what happened at that wedding was only the beginning. The real story is what nobody saw coming. Before we go deeper, if you are already feeling this story, tap that subscribe button and drop a single word in the comments telling me where you are watching from. That one small tap tells me to keep telling stories like this one. Growing up as a Harper in Paradise Valley meant one lesson before any other. Appearances were not important. Appearances were everything. Our house sat behind an iron gate on land shaped by landscapers who charged by the boulder. My father Vincent built luxury commercial properties across the Southwest. The kind that won sustainability awards more for the brochures than the buildings. My mother Diane wore platinum hair that never moved. And jewelry that was always real, always tasteful, and always calibrated to communicate status without appearing greedy. Everything in that house had a purpose. Every dinner. Every guest list. Every carefully chosen word. Preston understood the code before he could read. 3 years older than me, he seemed born knowing exactly what our parents wanted. Lacrosse, because that is what boys from good families played. USC for the degree. Georgetown for the polish. Hartman and Associates for the network. He checked boxes with the efficiency of someone filling out a form he had memorized in the womb. I tried to follow the same script. I really did. I joined the right clubs. I volunteered at the right charities. I smiled through the endless dinners where adults asked me what I planned to study with that specific tone that meant there were exactly 3 acceptable answers. And then in my junior year of high school, I took an environmental science elective because it fit my schedule, and something in me broke open. Renewable energy. Grid systems. The physics of light becoming power. It was the first thing that ever felt real. The dinner where I told them I wanted to study environmental engineering is a memory I still carry like a bruise. My father set down his fork with that deliberate precision that meant disappointment. Engineering, he repeated like I had suggested becoming a street performer. Natalie, sweetheart, that is a very technical field. Very male-dominated. Are you sure? My mother jumped in with her concerned face. There are so many wonderful programs in business or environmental policy, she said. You could still work in that field, but position yourself for leadership. Position yourself for the right people. The right people. That phrase lived in our house like a 4th family member. And the right people did not get their hands dirty. I went to Colorado Boulder anyway. Partly because their engineering program was excellent, partly because putting a few states between myself and that dining room felt like survival. When I graduated, my parents came with smiles that never reached their eyes. When I told them I had taken a job with a small renewable energy consulting firm in Denver instead of the corporate programs Preston had lined up for me, those smiles vanished entirely. Consulting, my father said, "That is not a real job, Natalie. That is what people do between real jobs." Preston flew in with a publicist named Tiffany, who wore too much perfume and put his arm around me in that big brother way that always felt more condescending than kind. "Do not worry, Nat," he said. "Everyone needs time to figure things out." Denver was a small apartment in a neighborhood with exposed brick and rent that took most of my paycheck. The consulting work was steady enough, assessing commercial buildings, recommending solar, writing reports that mostly gathered dust while companies quietly killed the projects that would have actually helped anyone. 2 years of watching perfectly good renewable solutions get rejected because they were too different from how things had always been done. 2 years of watching rural communities pay astronomical bills because extending the grid cost more than utility companies wanted to spend. 2 years of realizing the problem was never the technology. The problem was who the technology was designed to serve. And then came a night at a coffee shop called Stella's Brew. 2 in the morning, empty streets outside. A proposal on my laptop I already knew would get rejected. And in the margin of that document, I started sketching something else. A modular microgrid, small enough to deploy in communities the big utilities ignored, cheap enough to scale, smart enough to distribute power in real time using an AI that would learn each household as intimately as a family member, a subscription model that made clean energy affordable to people the industry had priced out for a generation. I filled notebooks. I taught myself machine learning at kitchen tables. I emailed old professors at midnight. The consulting firm let me go quietly after I started missing deadlines. My parents stopped their weekly check-ins after I used the word freelancing, which they translated correctly as unemployed and too proud to admit it. Preston began introducing me at family events as his artistic sister, and I kept building. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because everyone in that family had already written the ending of my story. They had already decided who I was. They had already told their friends. And I was quietly assembling the thing that would rewrite every word of it. But I was not going to get there alone, because a stranger was about to walk onto my roof. The solar panel on my apartment building had been malfunctioning for 3 weeks, and the property management company kept sending technicians who poked at it, declared it beyond their expertise, and left. So, one afternoon, I climbed up there myself with a multimeter and a laptop, and cut off shorts and the stubbornness of a woman who had run out of patience. That is how Ethan found me. "You are going to electrocute yourself," a voice said behind me. Calm. Matter of fact, no judgment in it. I turned to find a man in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt that said SunPath Solutions across the chest. Tool belt slung low. Sandy hair sticking up like he had been running his hands through it. "The breaker is off," I said defensively. "The breaker is off on the building side," he corrected, walking toward me with the easy confidence of someone who spent a lot of time on roofs. "But whoever installed this ran a secondary line straight from the panel without a shut-off. That conduit is hot." I looked where he pointed and my stomach dropped. I had been seconds away from putting a probe into a live 240-volt line. He fixed the panel in 20 minutes. He explained what he was doing as he worked like he was teaching a class. And when he finished, he mentioned almost as an afterthought that his shop was hiring someone who could talk to clients without their eyes glazing over. I said yes before I could think about it. The next day, his shop turned out to be a converted garage in an industrial neighborhood surrounded by breweries and furniture makers. Inside was organized chaos. Solar panels stacked against walls. Spools of wire hanging from ceiling hooks. 3 different laptops in various stages of cannibalization. He made coffee in a French press that sat next to a drill press, and we talked for 2 hours. Somewhere in that conversation, I pulled out my phone and started showing him GridSync. The concept, the math, the AI, the financing model that would let entire communities buy in without needing a bank. I talked too fast. I probably sounded half crazy. And when I finally stopped, Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "This is real," he said. "You have actually built this." He asked how much funding I needed. I told him. He nodded slowly. And then he said something I had stopped believing anyone would ever say to me. "What if I told you I know people who fund exactly this kind of project? Not venture capitalists chasing the next unicorn. Impact investors who actually care whether the technology helps anyone." I should have been skeptical. I'd heard promises like that before and watched them evaporate. But there was something about Ethan I could not quite name yet. Something I would not fully understand until much later. Because what he had not told me sitting there in that converted garage in a t-shirt that said Sunpath Solutions was that he had a PhD from Stanford. That he had turned down a professorship. That he had walked away from a position at Tesla because he did not want to build toys for the wealthy. He was letting people underestimate him. On purpose. And within a week, his calls would start coming back. Real investors. Real meetings. Real numbers. And the small solar panel guy my mother would later dismiss at a party was about to change my life in ways that had nothing to do with technology and everything to do with the kind of partnership you spend your whole life hoping to find. If this is landing, tap that like button right now. It sounds small, but it is the one signal that tells me you want the next part. And trust me, you want the next part. Preston's engagement party arrived like weather I could feel in my bones. Black tie, Sedona lighting. Vanessa's father, Gerald Sterling, flying in from Connecticut with the confidence of a man who had never been told no about anything that mattered. I found a simple black dress at a consignment shop. Ethan showed up at my hotel room in a charcoal suit that actually fit him, and we drove up to the Harper estate in his truck, which the valet eyed like it might contaminate the Teslas parked around it. My mother spotted us the moment we crossed the threshold. She kissed the air near my cheek. She assessed Ethan like produce at a farmer's market, and she asked him the question that would determine his value in her social calculus. "What do you do, Ethan?" "I run a renewable energy installation company in Denver," he said. "How interesting," she replied in a tone that meant the exact opposite. She peeled me away toward the bar where my father stood with Gerald Sterling and a cluster of men who all looked as though they shared a barber. Gerald asked what firm I was with. I told him I was developing my own technology. He said the word startup like it was a hobby. My father apologized in advance for me. "Natalie is idealistic," he said. "We keep hoping she will consider something more stable." I smiled. I excused myself. I found Ethan at the buffet table. Dinner dragged on through courses that no one needed. Preston stood eventually, champagne glass raised, and in front of 200 guests he thanked everyone who mattered to him. And then he found me across the room and he smiled. "Nat has always been the creative one in the family," he said. "While some of us were climbing corporate ladders, she has been out in Denver trying to change the world one solar panel at a time." Polite laughter. "I admire her optimism, I really do," he went on. "Not everyone has the temperament for the real world, for the tough choices, for actual success. But Natalie is out there giving it her best shot, and I think that is worth celebrating even if she is still figuring out what she wants to be when she grows up." Louder laughter this time. Someone applauded. I kept my face perfectly still. Under the table, Ethan's hand found mine, and I felt the muscle in his jaw tighten. "Easy," I whispered. "It is not worth it." But something had already shifted in his expression. Something I had not seen in him before. He leaned close. "How would you feel about making this interesting?" he whispered back. "Your brother thinks you are a naive idealist playing at business. What if we showed him exactly how wrong he is?" I did not answer, because at that exact moment, my mother arrived at our table with Vanessa in tow and the interrogation began again. Vanessa suggested I have Ethan quote solar for her new house in Paradise Valley. My mother emphasized the word small. Vanessa smiled and said no offense. That is when my father joined us, Gerald Sterling beside him, and the whole family power structure closed around Ethan like a slow tide. "So Ethan," my father said, "Natalie mentioned you run an installation company. What is your background? Did you study business?" "Environmental engineering," Ethan replied. "PhD from Stanford." The silence that followed had weight. My father blinked. Gerald Sterling's eyebrows lifted. My mother's smile froze in place. "Stanford. My father repeated. That is quite prestigious. Why on earth would you leave academia for installation work? Because installing solar panels is actually helping people access clean energy, Ethan said. His voice still polite, his eyes not polite at all. Academic papers mostly just help people get tenure. Preston laughed, the diffusing laugh he used in court. Seems like a waste of potential, but to each their own. Gerald chuckled. My mother recovered enough to send us to the gardens. It was a dismissal, dressed as hospitality. Ethan and I walked out through the French doors into desert air that had cooled with the sunset. I could still hear the party behind us. Music. Laughter. Glassware. But out there among the saguaros, it felt like we had stepped outside the performance entirely. Preston was not always like this, I told him. Ethan looked at me for a long moment, then he said something I would carry with me for months. You know it is going to be really satisfying, he said. When they find out what I asked. About GridSync. About the investment deals you are closing. About the fact that the sister they have been treating like a failed experiment is about to disrupt an entire industry. I had not told him yet about the term sheet sitting in my email. I did not need to. He had already seen it in the way I worked. 3 weeks after that party, the term sheet became a signed agreement. GridSync Technologies had its Series A, a small, talented team. 18 months to prove the technology could scale. The first check hit my account on a Tuesday morning, and I stared at the screen for 10 minutes convinced there had been a banking error. That was the beginning. Everything after that was pace, hiring, office space. A pilot project in a rural community outside Fort Collins, 40 homes that had been hit hard by utility rate increases, 3 months of implementation nightmares, panels arriving late, software bugs, building codes we had not anticipated. Nights. I slept on the office couch. And then, in late spring, the data came back. 60% reduction in energy costs, the system running smoothly. A waiting list of communities asking to be next. Take a breath here. Because something is coming that even I did not see coming. And once it starts, none of us will be able to stop it. Preston's wedding invitation arrived in June on heavy cardstock with my name in calligraphy. Sedona. Black tie. 3 days of events. My mother called to remind me. My mother called to ask if I would bring a guest. My mother called with a specific tone that said, "This is important. Natalie, do not embarrass us." I promised I would be there. Then I hung up and I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Ethan found me in the office that night, surrounded by empty coffee cups and diagrams I could not solve. He handed me Thai food. He looked at my screen. He fixed my algorithm in about 4 minutes, and then he handed me his phone. There was an email on it from a producer at CNN, a national series on young innovators disrupting traditional industries, a segment called Power Player Spotlight. They wanted me, filming in Atlanta in 3 weeks, airing sometime in the following month. Probably, he said carefully, right around when Preston is getting married. I stared at the screen. I stared at him. That feels petty, I said. It is not petty, he replied. It is accurate reporting on legitimate business success happening to air at an inconvenient time for your brother's ego. Those are very different things. I said yes. He wrote back to the producer while my food went cold. 3 weeks blurred into one long sprint. Media consultants. Practice interviews. Ethan playing the skeptical journalist night after night in my apartment. One had my sister, he would ask. There are lots of renewable energy companies. What makes GridSync different? Because we are not selling solar panels to people who can already afford them, I would answer. We are making clean energy work for people who need it most. Better, he would say. Now say it again like you believe it. And each time I said it, I believed it a little more. The flight to Atlanta was early morning. I barely slept the night before. Kesha had picked out my clothes. I had gotten my hair cut for the first time in months. The CNN studios were smaller than I expected and more intimidating. All glass and sharp angles and people moving with silent purpose. Richard Chen was warmer in person than on television. When the cameras started rolling, I felt my nerves settle into something like focus. Natalie Harper is 30 years old. He began looking straight into the camera. and she is already disrupting an industry that has been resistant to change for decades. The interview lasted 40 minutes. He asked me about walking away from the traditional path. He asked me whether I was too focused on mission and not enough on business fundamentals. I smiled at that one. I told him that good business fundamentals and meaningful mission are not mutually exclusive. I told him GridSync had strong unit economics and we were hitting our growth targets. I told him that refusing to accept that profit and purpose could coexist was itself the naive position. When the camera stopped, Richard shook my hand and told me I should be proud of what I was building. Not just the technology, the way I talked about it. Then a crew flew back to Denver with me and filmed the Fort Collins installation. An older woman named Patricia told the camera that GridSync had saved her from choosing between electricity and medication. A young father talked about finally being able to afford air conditioning for his kids in summer. Those testimonials meant more than any technical achievement. And I stood there behind the camera watching an older woman describe what my work meant to her life, and I understood for the first time that I had actually done it. I had actually built the thing. The producer told me this segment would air in about 3 weeks. She could not guarantee exactly when. Probably late July or early August. I did the math in my head. Preston's wedding was the second weekend in August. The wedding weekend began with a rehearsal dinner overlooking red rock formations that glowed amber in the sunset. Preston and Vanessa had spared no expense. My mother spotted us first. "You look tired," she said. "Have you been sleeping enough?" "Work has been busy," I told her. Preston worked the room like a candidate. When he finally made his way to us, his handshake with Ethan was firm enough to be aggressive. "Still doing the solar panel thing," he said. Among other things, Ethan replied evenly. My father steered me toward a quieter corner and mentioned that Gerald Sterling was interested in learning more about my little project. GridSync is not looking for additional investors right now, I told him. We are fully funded through our Series A. My father blinked. Series A, he repeated. That is significant funding. $8.5 million, I said. We closed in January. And for the first time in my adult life, I watched my father look at me like he was seeing me instead of looking around me. That is impressive, he said. Why did you not mention this? I did mention it. I told him. Mom called it promising and changed the subject. Then my phone buzzed. A text from the CNN producer. A date. A time. 3 days from that moment, right in the middle of Preston's wedding events, I showed Ethan. He raised his eyebrows. He said nothing. Take a breath again, because what happens next is what the last 30 years of my life had been quietly building toward. The wedding day arrived under a cloudless Arizona sky. The ceremony was beautiful in that expensive, impersonal way. The reception was held in a ballroom transformed into an enchanted garden. If enchanted gardens had open bars and a live band that cost more than my car. I had just finished congratulating Preston and Vanessa when my phone started buzzing. Text after text from people I knew in the industry, calls from numbers I did not recognize, Kesha sending strings of emojis I could not decode. I stepped outside into the desert heat and opened my news app. The CNN interview had aired early, bumped up in the schedule because of breaking news. My face stared back at me from the screen. The headline read, 30-year-old engineer disrupts energy industry with AI-powered microgrids. I stood there in the parking lot watching my own interview on my phone, barely recognizing the confident person on the screen. The segment was good, better than I had hoped. It wove the technical innovation with the human stories from Fort Collins. It made GridSync look not just promising, essential. And back inside the reception, people were starting to notice. Phones came out. Guests leaned together, whispering and glancing in my direction. Preston was mid-speech when someone at a front table pulled up the segment. The glow of the screen was visible from where I stood. He powered through the toast professional to the end, but I saw the moment he registered what was happening, the slight tightness around his eyes. When he finished and the applause died down, my father appeared at my elbow. Natalie, he said. People are asking me about a CNN interview. What is going on? I handed him my phone with the segment already playing. I watched his face as he watched it. I watched him realize that the disappointing daughter he had apologized for at cocktail parties for a decade had just been introduced to the country as someone worth paying attention to. This aired today. During the wedding, I said. I did not control the timing, they moved it up. My mother appeared beside him. She watched the segment over his shoulder, her expression unreadable. Well, she said finally. This is unexpected. It is wonderful, my father corrected, and I heard something new in his voice, something I had never heard directed at me, something close to pride. Natalie, he said. Why did you not tell us things had progressed this far? I tried, I said. You were not interested in the details. Preston found us moments later. Vanessa trailing behind, confused about why her wedding reception had suddenly become about someone else. His smile was tight. Quite a day for news, he said. CNN. That is big time. I did not plan the timing, I told him. Sure, he said. Just interesting how these things work out. And then something in his face shifted. He looked at me for a long moment. I could see him running through years of dinner speeches and casual dismissals and comments about my little solar panel boyfriend. And finally, he said something I did not expect. You know what he said, I believe you. And honestly, good for you. I might have underestimated what you were building. It was not an apology, it was not an acknowledgement of anything specific, but it was a crack in a wall he had spent a lifetime building. And in that crack, I saw the older brother who had once taught me how to ride a bike before he learned that being the golden child came with rewards. The rest of the evening was surreal. Family members who had barely spoken to me all weekend suddenly wanted to know about grid sync. Cousins asked for my card. Gerald Sterling cornered me to discuss investment opportunities with an intensity that felt almost desperate. My mother introduced me to her friends as her daughter who had just been on CNN. Pride finally creeping into her voice for the first time in 10 years. And Ethan found me on a balcony overlooking the resort grounds. He handed me a glass of champagne. He leaned against the railing beside me. How are you holding up? He asked. I do not know, I said. This feels weird. Weird how? Like I spent 30 years being invisible and suddenly everyone can see me but only because CNN told them I was worth looking at. Nothing about me actually changed. Just their perception. That is exactly what changed, he said. You have been doing work that mattered for years. Now the people who could not see it before do not have any excuse. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the red rocks in shades of orange and purple. My phone kept buzzing. My inbox filled with names I had spent years cold emailing that had never written back. And inside the ballroom, the band started again. Through the windows I could see Preston and Vanessa dancing, their moment reclaimed. My parents talking with guests, probably explaining their daughter's sudden prominence, all of them recalibrating who I was and what I had built. Here is what I want you to understand. The vindication was not the point. The applause was not the point. The look on my father's face was not the point. I did not build grid sync so my family would finally see me. I built it because there was an older woman named Patricia in Fort Collins who no longer had to choose between electricity and medication. I built it because there was a young father who could finally cool his kids in summer. I built it because somewhere in Denver at 2 a.m. I sketched a company on the back of a napkin and I could not put the pen down. The recognition came. Eventually. But the work came first. And that is the only order that ever mattered. If someone in your life has ever made you feel small for wanting more than they were willing to imagine for you, I want you to hear me. Keep building, quietly, patiently, relentlessly. Do not build to prove anyone wrong. Build because there is something in you that will not stop asking to exist. The world catches up eventually, and when it does, you will not care about the applause. You will care about the woman in the audience who saw herself in your story and decided to keep going one more day. That is the ending my family did not expect. And it is the ending I hope you steal for your own life. If this story reached something real in you, do 3 things before you close this. Tap that subscribe button so the next story finds you. Hit like so more people who need to hear this can find it too. And leave a comment telling me the one thing in your life you are quietly building right now that the people around you do not take seriously yet. I read every single one. And someone out there needs to see your comment tonight more than they need anything else. I will be right here waiting for you in the next story.